You ever watch a horror movie, your heart is just pounding, but you can't look away? Or maybe you've seen people line up for hours just to walk through some terrifying haunted house? I mean, it makes no sense, right? We are built to run from danger, not pay good money for it. So let's dive into the fascinating psychology of why we actually love to be scared. I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? Our survival instincts, which have been sharpened over millions of years, they're screaming at us to avoid threats at all costs. And yet here we are, actively looking for experiences designed to trigger that exact feeling of fear. So what is really going on inside our heads? And seriously, don't make the mistake of thinking this is some niche hobby. We're talking about a massive, multi-billion-dollar global industry built on jump scares, suspense, and pure, unadulterated dread. From blockbuster movies to theme parks, the business of being scared is absolutely booming. To understand why, we've got to look at the really elegant wiring inside our own skulls. Okay, so it all starts with this battle, a kind of tug-of-war raging between two key parts of your brain. On one side, you've got this ancient, instinctual alarm bell, and on the other, you have the modern, logical mission control. This internal conflict, well, that is the secret ingredient to enjoying a good scare. So first up, meet your amygdala. Just think of it as your brain's super-sensitive smoke detector. It's old, it's incredibly fast, and it does not bother with the details. The second it senses a potential threat, a sudden movement, a loud noise, it just yanks that fire alarm, flooding your body with adrenaline and getting you ready to either fight for your life or run for the hills. But right after that alarm goes off, mission control chimes in. This is your frontal cortex, the rational thinking part of your brain. So while your amygdala is screaming, "Get out! Evacuate!" your frontal cortex is calmly looking around, taking in the scene and asking, "Hang on a second. Are we in a movie theater? Am I holding a bucket of popcorn? Is that a real ghost or just a really, really good special effect?" You know, this comparison is a perfect way to get it. If you see a lion in the wild, both parts of your brain are in total, terrifying agreement. Run. But if you see that same lion behind reinforced glass at the zoo, your frontal cortex sends an all-clear signal. It basically tells your panicked amygdala, "Hey, stand down. There's a barrier. We're safe." And that ability to consciously override that primal fear, that is the key that unlocks the entire experience. So it really all boils down to context. When your brain is absolutely certain that you're in a controlled environment, it completely reframes that physiological rush you're feeling. The fear doesn't just disappear, you still feel it, but it transforms from a legitimate threat into, well, a form of play. This right here is the golden rule of recreational fear. There has to be a safety net. Your rational mind is holding the ultimate trump card, reminding you that no matter how intense things get, the monster isn't coming home with you. This is what lets you kind of surf that wave of adrenaline without the crushing weight of actual real-world dread. Sociologists actually have a name for this. They call it edge work. And it's not just about horror movies. It applies to skydiving, public speaking, really any activity where you deliberately get close to a boundary. It's this intentional act of pushing yourself to the very edge of control, just to experience that thrill and, maybe more importantly, to come back with a feeling of accomplishment. And that edge can be really profound. It's about flirting with the absolute limits of your own experience. For horror fans, it's about touching that line between sanity and insanity, between order and chaos, all from the comfort of a theater seat. You get a little taste of the abyss, and by surviving it, you learn something about your own strength. And this is where things get really fascinating. It's this concept of reappraisal. So look at these two knobs here, one for anxiety, one for excitement. Now, neurochemically, that cocktail of hormones flooding your system, it's almost identical for both. The only real difference is how your brain interprets it. Because you know you're safe, your frontal cortex can literally turn down the anxiety knob and crank the excitement one way up. You get that amazing rush without the debilitating panic. So we enjoy fear because our brain knows it's a game. Okay, but what if there's an even deeper, more practical benefit? Some researchers believe our love of horror might actually be a powerful training program for real-life crises. It's called the threat simulation hypothesis, and the idea is pretty simple. Scary stories act like a flight simulator for our minds. They let us explore worst-case scenarios, see different survival strategies play out, and practice regulating our emotions, all without any actual risk. It's basically a mental fire drill. Now, for a long time, this was really just a theory, but then a global crisis provided the perfect, if pretty tragic, real-world laboratory. When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, a team of researchers jumped on the opportunity to see if this hypothesis actually held up under the pressure of a genuine global threat. And what they found was, frankly, remarkable. A study from April of 2020 discovered that people who regularly watched horror movies reported way lower levels of psychological distress during those early days of the pandemic. And what's even more telling, fans of what you might call prepper genres, zombie apocalypses, alien invasions, they not only felt more prepared for what was happening, but they were also less distressed. This chart really just drives the point home. Take a look at the reported levels of preparedness. When they looked specifically at people who'd seen pandemic-themed movies, the link was just undeniable. The more of these films someone had seen, the more mentally and practically prepared they felt. It really suggests that by playing through these scenarios for fun, we might actually be building a valuable mental playbook for when things get real. But of course, not everybody experiences horror in the same way. Researchers have found that people are often drawn to scary stuff for very different reasons, and they've actually identified 3 distinct profiles of, let's call them, fear seekers. So first, you've got the adrenaline junkies. These folks are here for that pure physical sensation. The racing heart, the gasping for breath. For them, that fight-or-flight response is the prize. Then you have the white-knucklers. They don't necessarily enjoy being scared, but they put up with it. They're the ones watching through their fingers because they want to prove to themselves that they can handle it. They come out the other side with a sense of mastery. And finally, you have the dark copers. These are people who use horror almost like a form of therapy. By facing these controlled fictional fears, their own real-world anxieties start to seem smaller and more manageable. So think about it. The last time you sought out a good scare, what were you really after? Were you chasing that physical high? Testing your own courage, or maybe you were just trying to put your own life into perspective. It's pretty fascinating to think about what you're really looking for in the dark. So when you pull all these different threads together, our fascination with fear turns out to be so much more complex than just a simple desire for a cheap thrill. It's a really deep-seated part of our psychology. So just to recap the big takeaways here. We seek out fear because we get a kick out of that tug of war in our brain, knowing our rational side is going to win. It gives us a safe space for edge work, letting us test our limits and feel that sense of mastery. It can act as a mental simulator, which might actually make us more resilient in a real crisis. And finally, it helps different people with different psychological needs, everything from thrill-seeking to managing anxiety. And I think ultimately that's the real gift of a good scare. It's like a guided tour of our own darkest corners, a chance to stare into the abyss from a safe distance, and to come back with this comforting knowledge that we can handle a lot more than we think. Which really just leaves us with one final thought. We spend so much of our lives trying to avoid fear, right? Building routines and comforts to keep it away. But maybe we're looking at it all wrong. Maybe fear isn't just an obstacle to be avoided, but a powerful tool that when we use it in a safe space can help us learn, grow, and become stronger. Have you ever wondered what is really going on inside your brain when you feel that sudden, heart-pounding jolt of fear? Well, today we're going to dive deep into the neuroscience of it all, how your brain creates it, why some fears stick around, and most importantly, how you can actually start to rewire that response. So let's get into it. I mean, wow. We've all felt that, right? That primal physical feeling that this quote just captures so perfectly. It's a totally universal human experience. But here's the thing. It's not just a feeling. It's a complex and incredibly fast biological event, all orchestrated by your brain. So what is that chain reaction? How does a simple sight or a sound go from being just, sensory information to a full-blown physical response that can literally make you jump out of your skin? That's the big question we're going to unpack. Okay, to start, we have to look at the brain's first responders. These are the parts that act like an instant alarm system, and their number one job is survival, above everything else. So meet the star of the show, the amygdala. This little almond-shaped thing isn't your thinking brain. This is your deep, ancient survival brain. Think of it like a bouncer or a relevance detector, constantly scanning everything you experience and asking one simple question. Is this a threat? And it makes that decision in less than 100 milliseconds. That's faster than you can blink.
Now, here's where the brain is super clever. It actually uses two different pathways at the same time. You've got the short route, which is like a direct emergency hotline from your senses straight to your amygdala. This is what causes that instant unconscious reaction, jumping back from something on the path before you even consciously realize it's a snake. But at the exact same time, there's the long route. This sends the same information up to your cortex, your thinking brain, for a more careful look. The cortex can then say, hey, amygdala, stand down. It was just a stick. That short route buys you precious, life-saving time, while the long route keeps you from freaking out over nothing. It's a brilliant system.
Okay, so that explains the immediate reaction. But why do some fears stick with us for weeks or months or even a lifetime? Why does the memory of a scary event feel so incredibly vivid years later?
Well, the answer really comes down to chemistry. When your amygdala sounds that alarm, your body gets flooded with stress hormones. And these chemicals, they act just like a giant neon highlighter for your brain. They're essentially screaming, pay attention. This experience right here is important. You need to remember this. It's an evolutionary trick to help us learn from danger so we can avoid it next time.
Let's look at the two key players in this chemical cocktail. You've got norepinephrine, which acts like a camera flash, making the memory super bright and emotionally charged. And then you have cortisol, which comes in and helps cement that memory, basically acting like glue to make sure it gets stored away for the long term. Together, they make sure that really emotional events, especially the scary ones, are not easily forgotten.
So what all this means is that fear is a learned process. And here's the really good news. Anything that has been learned can also be unlearned, or at the very least, relearned. The brain's wiring isn't permanent, and that is huge.
Okay, I know this chart might look a bit complex, but the idea behind it is absolutely fascinating. Think of a memory like a document you pull out of a filing cabinet. Every single time you open that file to look at it, there's a brief window of time where you can actually make edits before you put it back. In science, that editing window is called reconsolidation. So if you look at the chart, panel A is the original fear memory being created. But check out panel B. When that memory is recalled, scientists found that they can introduce something like a beta blocker during that little editing window to actually weaken the fear response when the memory gets saved again. It's basically a way to hack the memory itself. How cool is that?
This whole idea of modifying memories leads to two main ways of tackling fear. The first one is extinction-based therapy. This doesn't erase the old fear, but instead it focuses on creating a new safety memory that's stronger and can compete with it. It's like building a new, better road right next to the old, bumpy one. The other approach, reconsolidation-based therapy, is a bit different. It tries to go back and weaken the original fear memory itself, using that editing window we just talked about. So one builds a new memory, the other tries to fix the old one.
Clinical therapies are obviously powerful tools, but what about the rest of us? What can we do in our day-to-day lives? Well, it turns out we can actually train our brains to respond differently to stress and fear, using some really practical, accessible tools. This right here, this is such a critical idea to grasp. Your body's stress response, that fight or flight system designed to save you from a tiger, it gets set off by a worrying thought, a stressful email, or just replaying an argument in your head. Your body literally doesn't know the difference. Your mind is the gateway, which means your thoughts alone can kick off that entire physical panic response. So how do we manage that gateway? One of the most powerful methods is mindfulness. And let's be super clear, this isn't about emptying your mind or becoming a zombie. It's actually the exact opposite. It's about learning the skill of paying attention to what's happening right now, your thoughts, your feelings, sensations in your body, but with a sense of curiosity instead of judgment. And it really is a skill you can train, just like going to the gym to build a muscle. Here's a super practical way to put this into action next time you feel a big emotion like fear or anger bubbling up. First, just stop. That's it. Just pause and notice it. Where do you feel it in your body? Is your chest tight? Is your stomach in knots? Second, observe it with curiosity, almost like you're a scientist studying it. What are its qualities? Is it buzzing, heavy, hot, sharp? Does it move or change? And finally, step 3, just allow it to be there. You don't have to fight it or push it away. Breathe with it, and imagine it like a wave of energy that will rise, crest, and eventually pass. This simple practice can completely change your relationship with tough emotions. So the ultimate takeaway here is this. While our brains are definitely hardwired for fear to keep us safe, they are also incredibly flexible. We've seen how fear memories can be weakened and how we can literally train our own attention to change our response to stress. Your mind is the gateway. So the only question left is, are you ready to practice opening a different door?
All right, let's get into it. You know that feeling, right? The lights go down, the volume goes way up, and your heart just starts hammering in your chest. But have you ever really stopped to think about how a movie actually does that to you? Well, today, we're pulling back the curtain on the science of a good scare. And this quote right here, this is the whole idea. A great horror film isn't just a story, it's a machine. It's a meticulously designed piece of engineering, an architecture of manipulation that is built to hack your brain and your body to force a reaction. This isn't magic, it's science. So in this explainer, we're going to open up the filmmaker's toolbox. We'll look at the sonic arsenal they use to trigger us, the uncanny visuals that mess with our minds, the narrative engine that traps us in anxiety, and finally, how this all comes together in what's called post-horror. We're going to start with sound. Why? Because it's the most primal weapon a horror director has. It's like a secret entrance that bypasses your rational brain and talks directly to that ancient part of you that's still wired to listen for predators in the dark.
The science behind this is called psychoacoustics. And this isn't about whether a sound is pleasant or not. It's about how that sound physically changes your body. We're talking about using specific frequencies and volumes to literally control your heart rate, your blood pressure, and that creeping sense of dread, whether you like it or not.
So how do they do it? Well, there are two main tools. First up is dissonance and pitch. You know those screeching violins from Psycho? Our brains are pattern-finding machines, so when notes just clash and don't resolve, it creates this deep physical feeling of wrongness. But the second tool, well, it might be even more powerful, and it's the last thing you'd expect: silence. And check this out, because it's totally counterintuitive. You'd think the loudest, scariest noises would stress you out the most, right? Wrong. This research shows that in a really tense situation, like a horror game, it's the moments of complete silence that actually cause the biggest spike in your heart rate. Your brain knows something is coming, and that anticipation, straining to hear the threat, is physically more stressful than the threat itself. Which leads us right to the classic jump scare formula. See, it's not just some random loud noise. It's a very precise three-step recipe. First, you build up all this tension with creepy music and visuals. Step 2, you rip all the sound away, putting the audience in that state of high alert anticipation. And then, Step 3, you hit them with a sudden, loud blast of noise. It's a technique so famous it even has a name: the Luton bus.
Now here's the really important part. A jump scare has nothing to do with how much you care about the characters. It works because it's a biological cheat code. That sudden sound completely hijacks your amygdala's startle reflex. That's a deep, primitive survival instinct. Your brain doesn't have time to ask questions, it just reacts. It is a pure physiological hack.
Okay, moving on to the second tool in the box, what we see. And here's the thing, the scariest things in movies often aren't giant fanged monsters. No, they're the things that look almost, but not quite, human. This brings us to a concept called the Uncanny Valley. The theory goes like this: as a robot or a CGI character looks more and more human, we like it more and more, but only up to a point. When it gets almost perfect, but something is just a little off, our positive feelings suddenly crash into this valley of deep unease, even disgust. So, why on earth does this happen? It all comes down to cognitive dissonance. Your brain is an expert at recognizing human faces. It's one of the things it does best. So when it sees something that's 99% human, but the eyes don't move right or the skin looks a little too smooth, alarm bells go off. Your brain detects a mismatch, a glitch in reality. And that internal conflict, that human but not human feeling, that's the dread. All right, so sound hijacks our body. Visuals mess with our brain. But what keeps you glued to the screen for 2 hours straight? Well, that's our third tool, the narrative engine. This is how filmmakers use the story itself to trap you in a state of sustained anxiety. And the master of this was Alfred Hitchcock. He gave us the perfect way to understand the difference between suspense and surprise. Surprise is easy. Two people are talking, a bomb under the table goes off. You get a quick shock. But suspense? Suspense is when the audience knows the bomb is under the table, ticking away, but the characters don't. Now, their boring conversation about the weather becomes absolutely unbearable. You just want to scream at them, "Get out!" And Hitchcock himself said it best. That feeling of apprehension, the anxiety you feel for them because you know something they don't, is so incredibly powerful. It can actually become stronger than whether you like or dislike the characters. You could hate them, but you'll still be on the edge of your seat hoping they get away. Suspense is just so much more potent than a cheap shock.
Another really effective narrative tool is gaslighting. In a movie, this is when a character's sense of reality is constantly attacked, making them, and us the audience, start to question what's real. Is the house actually haunted, or is our main character just losing their mind? That uncertainty is a trap. It leaves us with no solid ground to stand on, and that is a terrifying place to be.
So you take these incredibly powerful tools, the sonic triggers, the uncanny visuals, and these deep narrative traps, and what happens when filmmakers decide to focus almost entirely on creating that sustained psychological dread? Well, you get the rise of a subgenre that people are calling post-horror.
So, what is post-horror, or elevated horror as it's sometimes called? It's not about getting rid of scares, it's about changing the goal. The main objective isn't just to make you jump out of your seat. It's to leave you with this deep, lingering sense of unease by focusing on atmosphere, on psychological terror, and on really heavy themes.
And you can really see how all these characteristics work together. The style is often really slow, really minimalist. That gives that feeling of dread all the space it needs to grow. And the horror itself isn't coming from a monster in the closet. It's coming from real human experiences like grief and trauma. And that makes it feel so much more personal and inescapable. And here are just a few perfect examples. You've got Hereditary, which literally turns family grief into an engine for absolute terror. A Quiet Place, which weaponizes silence itself. Or Get Out, which uses the horror framework to talk about massive social anxieties. They all use the classic tools we've been talking about, just for a much deeper, more unsettling purpose.
So next time you're watching a horror movie and you feel that chill run down your spine, you'll know exactly what's going on. You'll hear the psychoacoustic tricks, you'll see the narrative traps being laid out for you, which really just leaves one last question. Does knowing how the trick is done spoil the fear? Or does it just give you a whole new level of respect for the architect who designed it?